rivers run into the sea. Imran, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gus, for getting me to do this and like having me have the chance to speak to Arshia. I'm always so excited to talk to Arshia. And I realized that this morning, it's been 10 years since I first read your translation of the Valmiki Ramayana. When we did that session together, when you did that session in Pune. So I thought maybe we could start at the beginning and talk about translation and the process of translation. So when we place the Valmiki Ramayana within a literary history of India, what is the effect that it has on the text, and possibly what is the effect that it has on translation or the process of translation?
Yeah, so let me first say hello to all. I see so many friends, and I'm very moved. Thank you all for making the time, to listen. But I mean, since you are friends, you've heard me say all of these things at least 100 times, poem run probably 200 times. But I will say that they do bear repeating, because the Ramayana occupies a very unique place in Hindu culture, in Indian culture, in the culture of South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think that's really what you're referring to in a sense, Imran, obliquely, when you say how do we situate Ramayana, not as a text on its own, but in its context. And its most immediate context, of course, is the Mahabharata. They're twin texts, as it were. They were composed probably around the same time. We say that the Mahabharata is older because of the kind of Sanskrit that it manifests, or the kinds of Sanskrit that it's written in. And we're talking probably like the earliest layers of these stories, the earliest versions of these stories were probably in circulation around 500 BCE. Now that is not, it's not like nothing else is happening. I mean, it's the early Upanishads are being composed at that time. The late Vedas are still being put together, not perhaps the Rig Veda itself, though possibly some hymns in book 10 of the Rig Veda are contemporaneous with Ramayana and Mahabharata, but certainly, the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas. So there is a universe of literature, there is a universe of texts, and as Ramanujan taught us, there really is a very, very profound universe of intertextuality. The texts know each other. In some cases, they speak to each other. The Rama is contained within the Mahabharata. But for me, what in the last few years, what I've become increasingly aware of, and that's because of, just reading Ramayana. I mean, you read the text for 30 years, and it just keeps showing you new things. But one of the things that has become very exciting to me is that this is also the period in which the historical Buddha, Gautama, lived, as did Mahavira, right? So as these texts, as Ramayana and Mahabharata are talking about kingship and caste hierarchy, but primarily kingship, right? Wars and battles and all. Simultaneous to that, we have historical figures who are talking about renunciation. And I've become very interested in this idea of Rama and Yudhishthira as reluctant kings, as kings who would rather not be kings. Of course, they both go into exile. Rama much more painfully, perhaps, than Yudhishthira. But while they're there, they're both very, very moved and deeply influenced by the conversations that they have with sages. And it deepens and widens their understanding of what it means to be human. And I think they take that back with them to their kingships. And, there's a chapter about this in my new book. It's called, Something in the Ascetic Ideal. And I actually had the most fun writing that chapter. And so I think that's important. Note that none of these texts exist in a vacuum, not then, and certainly not now. Even when we receive the text, we're never receiving them in a vacuum, particularly Ramayana. I mean, if you think of how the Ramayana has been remade in India since the 1980s, that is a huge context that we absolutely cannot afford to ignore. whether we agree or not agree, that's not the point. But this is the context in which we are now receiving Ramayana, in which we're talking about it, in which we're writing about it. Is that a reasonable answer to your question?
Okay. And I was also kind of like thinking about, because it comes after Mahavira and it comes after the Buddha and it comes after the Vedas. Yeah, there's also like a shift between sort of Brahmin intelligentsia and Kshatriya Dharma and things like that. And I think for me, like, I've always found like Dharma, just as for you, like you pointed out to me so many times, is that Dharma really forms the center of this text. So I think what I want to also ask you is that because we see this sort of shift and this kind of conflict, yeah, so with the Ramayana, we have its conflict, yeah, is he God, is he man, yeah, but also his own internal conflict. Is he a Kshatriya or is he an ascetic in the forest? And he's really unable to resolve that. And I think I also want to talk a little bit about your collection of essays on the Ramayana, yeah, Lost Loves, Exploring Rama's Anguish, which is amazing. Yeah, and it's amazing because you do that, because you talk about these conflicts through the character of Rama. And I was wondering why, I suppose maybe like as a feminist, why you chose to use Rama as a lens to unpack it.
Well, it's called Ramayana, so
Of
I mean, you kind of read the text and ignore the guy, But I wanted to say about the Brahmin Kshatriya thing, the transition texts, of course, are the Upanishads, right? Because that's where we really see, for the first time, we see kings who hold wisdom, Janaka, Jatashatru, right? So this idea that only Brahmins know the truth is already being challenged in Upanishads. Also, there are women. There's Gargi, there's Maitreyi and all that. So that's already happening. And then, outside even of the Upanishads, of course, are profoundly influenced by Buddhism and Jainism, by the words of the Buddha and the lives of the Tirthankaras. We only think of Mahavira, but he's number 24, right? So the Jains have always provided a contrapuntal soundtrack, as it were, to mainstream Hinduism and to the Vedas. And so what is implicit in Upanishads, right? That one way of finding wisdom is to just go think about it. You think hard enough, so you go to a teacher, you step away from society. I wouldn't like to use the word city at the moment because I'm not sure that we can call those segments cities. But in Buddhism and Jainism, it's like, hey guy, this is not simply about living in the forest, this is about giving it all up. So on the one hand, as the Upanishads are establishing the potential authority of non-Brahmins, kings in particular, Jainism and Buddhism are pushing back against kingship. And against violence and against the function of the warrior, the Kshatriya function. So there's a lot going on, and we only become aware of this, or we only recognize it when we put the Ramayana in context, right? Which is what your previous question was about. Rama himself, for me, that was really the breakthrough moment for Lost Loves. Suddenly, and this is also the reason why I think I could write about him in the way that I did. Look at, it's an incredible story. He thinks he's going to be king tomorrow morning. He's going to be crowned under the Pushya constellation and all like that. And suddenly, the night before, everything explodes, right? I mean, the life that he had imagined for himself is just erased. And that too on the whim of a woman. It's not like some natural disaster or catastrophe or something. It's the classic character, the stepmother. So anyway, then he goes off into the forest with his beloved and lovely wife, and Lakshmana is also somebody I think we need to give. how disturbed Rama is, you know. And I think one of the great things about Rama is no matter how disturbed he is, no matter how uncomfortable he is by what has happened, he doesn't take it out on other people. He doesn't show it, you know. He's like, okay, I have to do this, so I don't want to embarrass my father. I don't want to embarrass my stepmother. I don't want to get into a fight with my brother. And then he goes into the forest, and he, of course, meets many, many, you know, sages. But more than that, he has time to think. And he begins to think about how another life is possible, which I don't think he had ever seen in the palace. And in fact, there are 3 occasions in Nandigrama, in the forest, and once even in Ayodhya when Lakshmana is saying, come on, let's lock up our father. And he's like, no, no. 3 separate occasions, like Peter in the Bible, where he renounces Kshatriya Dharma. He says, no, I don't want this. Yeah. And that is huge for a Kshatriya and for a king to do this. So then he starts to think about other ways to be. And I think he's quite attracted to a life of quietude. But then the most horrible thing happens, which is that his wife is taken away from him. And at that moment, he knows he has to be a Kshatriya again. He has to get his wife back. He has to make this performative Kshatriya. Of course, he loves her. Of course, he wants her back. It's not that he's doing it just, you know, oh, let me show off. Not at all. I mean, he wants her back, but it has to be through this sort of hyper performance of Kshatriyaness. You know, go kill the bad guy, do like this, kill all these people, And I don't think he ever recovers from that. So he becomes, and then of course he has to go reclaim his kingdom, which he does. And then he has to banish his wife, also because he is a king and because he is a Kshatriya. So Rama's life is lived, of course, he chooses to live the public life, to be morally above reproach in public rather than morally above reproach in private. So, you know, it's, and that's why there's a chapter in Lost Loves called The Weapons of the Warrior and the Matted Locks of the Ascetic. The forest, people say, "Hey guy, who are you?" And Shurpanakha says to him, she says, "Who are you with the matted locks, with the weapons of a warrior and the matted locks of an ascetic? You have a woman with you." So he's sending out these mixed signals, but in fact, I think the mixed signals are because of the conflict that he is unable to resolve. And when he does actually resolve it, it has the most tragic, horrible consequences. He loses the love of his life, you know. And I think this thing about the Kshatriya's doubt, or the Kshatriya's confrontation of who he must be and what he must do, of course, is most magnificently expressed in Arjuna's question in the Bhagavad Gita, when he says to Krishna, how can I kill these people? Tell me how to do it. And I think that's very, very beautiful. I think that we also don't recognize enough that the story texts of Hinduism, if not the philosophical texts, and certainly not the texts that have become trapped in religion, but the texts that are story texts, we see that Hinduism allows an individual to question his or her or their place in an extremely determined world, in a profoundly stratified society. And that's only available to us when we
Has it frozen for you, Imran?
Yeah, I think it's frozen. Arshia is frozen. But that's okay, she'll be back.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. We are dealing with actually extremely heavy, very strange rain right across South India. I mean, Goa has been battered by it. Arshia told us that Bangalore has been battered by it. So these sort of gaps in communication are probably because of that. But let's hope the rain gods are looking happily on us.
Just keep on.
Imran, why don't you tell us a little bit about what, before Arshia comes back, what she was like as a teacher?
Oh my God. So it was in 2010, I was really having a very tough time, like with work. And this session came up, right? 10 days with Arshia to talk about the Ramayana. And she's an amazing teacher because she really like, she draws the characters out because she sees it as very much a literary text, yeah, and
Right.
to be able to see those characters sort of come to life, and I think exactly what she's talking about, these kinds of conflicts that we tend to kind of forget because they get wrapped up in kind of the religiosity of it a little bit. But I think that to see these characters as characters, with like real human problems. And I think, she'll come back and I think she'll talk about this, the conflict that Rama has constantly with his sense of identity. And like, he's always being asked this question, who are you? Lost Loves is a really beautiful, oh, Arshia's calling me, this must be. Hi. Hello? Yeah, I can hear you. Hold on. I'm going to put you on speaker.
Yeah.
Ah, super. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have Arshia's in face, but we have her voice. Imran, can you carry on that basis?
I hope she's trying to connect as well.
Okay. She should be back soon.
Okay, so Imran, just go back to what you were saying about Arshia as the teacher.
I think there are I have a feeling there are a lot of people here studied under Arshia.
Yeah, I think so.
But that's what I mean, is that, this sort of, and the thing is that it's not just with the Ramayana. I think that she really is able to open up this worldview of being able to understand it and to kind of like, put the text. So you kind of begin to see the text playing out. Like, I think one of the things that she and I always talk about, and I think also that's why this talk is named Reading the Ramayana in Moonlight, is because of this. Like, she's able really to draw out and really make contemporary and identifiable these metaphors.
You told me that the title of this talk, Reading Ramayana by Moonlight, was a private joke between you and Arshia.
Yeah, it's my own private joke to myself.
Can you explain it to the audience?
Sure. I'm going to actually come to it in the talk because we'll talk a little bit about it, but it's essentially because of the ways in which she talks, the ways in which she translates the metaphors of moonlight in the Ramayana. Like, she'll use these beautiful phrases when she translates it to describe the moon as a swan gliding upon a darkened lake. Or talk about the moon as a great tusker. Hang on, she's calling me again. Hi. Hello? Okay, I'm just going to try and call her.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think this rain is just like...
I'm going to apologize to the audience, but as I said, when we swap the physical meetings of the Dust Collective for these online meetings.
Hi, are you back? Are you able to come back online? Perfect. Okay, cool. Right. No. She'll be back in a minute. She's just getting back online. I think her internet has finally picked up.
No,
this is one of the things about doing online stuff. No, it's so unpredictable and kind of lose the flow and everything. But we should be able to bring it back. I hope.
Yeah, can I ask you, Imran, like, what drew you to the Ramayana? Because, personally, obviously, like most Indians, I grew up familiar with the text, but I always thought the Ramayana was sort of boring. I mean, the Mahabharata was much more complex and like had all these like fascinating characters. And I think my introduction to the Mahabharata was through Iravati Karve and, all these nuances. And to me, the Ramayana was always this like really boring text, about this one perfect figure. I will say that Arshia's like Lost Loves was one book that's made me start rethinking about the Ramayana. What about you? What was it that drew you to the Ramayana?
So I had the same feelings, about the Mahabharata. It's a very powerful book, and this Ramayana is about this ideal character. But I think when you read it, and I'm going to give you a book. Yeah, it's brilliant because it is so subtle. It's so subtle in the conflicts that it has. And I think, obviously, it was not only the text that drew me to it, but also during my research after that, like discovering at every moment hundreds and hundreds of retellings of the Ramayana. And to me, that's fascinating. How does a character, how does the story live through 2,500 years when everybody has something else to say about it? So I think it was kind of the plurality of the Ramayana tradition that really, really interested me a lot and sort of made me return to it. And I think
I'm back.
You're back.
Arshia.
Hello.
Hello. Wait, try. Your video is still coming on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
now.
back.
All
Great.
right.
Hello.
Great.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Hi. Sorry. No, I think
Okay,
we just
but-
have to take that as, you know, when there's something beautiful happening, the Rakshasas come, no, to interrupt the sacrifice. They've had their moment, they've gone.
Internet Rakshasas. Yeah. Yeah.
There are Rakshasas everywhere. But what I was saying, I think when I realized I'd been cut off, I was saying that, oh my God, Imran, I'm so sorry. My answers are getting longer and longer.
No, please.
So, but that was
That's the point of this, yeah. That's the point of this, yeah. But that's exactly it. No, like I think Doc was just asking me what it was that made me come to that session, those 10-day sessions with you in Pune, and kept me like engaged with this book, which I just showed you, which is now falling apart.
Yeah.
And I was saying it's that is the subtlety of the text.
Yes.
And these conflicts that we don't hear about when we think about the Ramayana otherwise. Everyone's like, oh, he's very perfect, he's great. But he has a lot of internal conflict, and you bring that out in Lost Loves and with all of your other work, which is so
in
amazing.
Uttara also, there's quite a lot about how, you know, once he becomes king, he's absolutely and utterly paralyzed. It's as if he can't act. And all he does really is he sits and listens to these Brahmins led by Agastya tell him all these stories about who Ravana was and who he is. And that's a very important change, because Agastya comes in the Uttarakanda. Before that, the family priest is Vasishtha, who's very gentle, and Agastya is a really aggressive Brahmin. So he takes control of the king. So the Uttarakanda actually, of course, it is composed much later. It's the resurgence of Brahminical values. And it's like, no, guy, we will tell you what to do. And the only other two things that Rama does in the Uttarakanda is the killing of Shambhuka, which is entirely about caste, and he banishes his wife, which is entirely about misogyny. You know, so it's quite and of course, once his wife leaves, he can barely think straight. You know, he's just completely shattered, and that's the price of kingship. You know,
and he also creates that golden statue of her, to constantly act as that reminder. And that's another thing that I really love is that, remember that when she's first abducted by Ravana, he describes Sita by the natural surroundings, but when he goes back to the city, he has to create this metal object, and I think that is so poetic, is that this heavy thing that he has to carry with him.
But like in Lost Loves, you know, I mean, ostensibly the statue is created because, you know, Brahmins, Agastya and all tell him, oh, you better get married again. You know, what is a king without a wife? The Mahishi has to preside along with the king at various rituals. And he's like, no, I'm not getting married again. And so they make this golden statue, which is ostensibly so that all the rituals can be performed completely. But I think that he makes a statue as a reminder to himself of all that he has lost, and as a reminder to his people, look what you made me do, look what I have done for you. You know, it's a very multivalent statue, and it's, as you said, it's poetic and it's heartbreaking.
Of course.
Yeah,
like I always remember.
It's so hard, as you know, to even look at the picture of a beloved, of a lost beloved, right? I still can't look at pictures of, you know, Sanjay, recent ones. And then to have this thing with you all the time.
Yes,
just
exactly.
Like, what a weight. What a weight.
Yeah, because I always think that, you know, when he's in the forest and he's using the trees, there's no permanence in that. There's always going to be like a change of season. There's going to be a change in the way it happens. And, and this is, yeah. And I think, yeah, these internal conflicts that he has, that's really super interesting. And in Lost Loves, you do this other great thing, which is about spaces. Spaces, yeah. Spaces and Dharma, which is, I think especially now, like with the whole lockdown that we've been through over all these months, and of course I live in Goa, which is a bit idyllic, but you know, the idea that when you go out, the spaces that you were used to are not the same spaces anymore, and these spaces are constantly changing. And because you kind of explore that in Lost Loves, 3 cities, a quest for Dharma. And you talk about Dharma as architectural also. Is that Ayodhya is a shining city, it's perfect roads, people behave in particular ways, and the spaces are defined by those dharmas. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about spaces and dharma.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't have to go to Ramayana for that. I mean, look, you know that I recently spoke to, a bunch of architects in relation to the Central Vista. Look at that redesign. Right?
Yes.
Like I am telling you not only who I am, but I'm telling you who you should be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, whatever's going to be raised, but it's not, of course, I mean, what is erased matters, but what replaces it is the statement.
Yeah.
And in Ramayana, I mean, it's so clear. There is Ayodhya, which is the city of the humans, which is sattvic, as it were, where everybody is good all the time and everybody does their dharma. And let me also say that Ayodhya is a good city because, and this is said overtly, all the caste people knew what they had done, right? Yes. They stayed within their boundaries.
Yeah.
And then we have Kishkinda, which is kind of like, sensual, there's lovely smell of liquor in the air, and the monkeys who are the children of Gandharvas, very beautiful. And, unlike the conjugal strictness of Ayodhya, I suddenly in Kishkinda, it's like, oh, you can take your brother's wife. You can have more than one sexual partner. It's allowed. And it's when Rama comes there and he's confronted with this, I think the mistake he makes there is that he tries to impose the dharma of Ayodhya on a society where it doesn't belong, right? And then we go to the third city, Lanka, which is Ravana's city. And my God, I mean, you will remember, Imran, the descriptions of the women and the descriptions of that. It's gone from lush to opulent, it's gone from sensual to almost decadent, right? And it's Ayodhya turned around. So, and of course there, as Ravana himself manifests so profoundly, you can have multiple sexual partners, right? But it's also very important, and the Valmiki Ramayana says this on more than one occasion, all these women in his inner apartments, but each one of them had come there of her own free will. Except for Sita. Except for Sita.
Exactly.
And of course there is Mandodari, his Mahishi, his chief queen. But also what I find fascinating is that, the dharma of cities is visited upon the behavior of their women, right? And the strictures put around women's behavior. I mean, Rama can do what he likes, Ravana can do what he likes, but Kaikeyi will be forever hated because she transgressed her role as an obedient wife. Sita, of course, suffers horribly for not even having transgressed, for just the possibility that Ravana might have touched her, not that she touched him, right? Ruma and Tara, the monkey wives, they also suffer from this, from other people's expectations of how they should live. And I mean, that is so true for us even now. And I'm not saying India is unique in this regard, but the nature of a city really, really is manifest in how it treats its women. Where can women go? Can we occupy public spaces as safely as men can? Where are the street lights? Who's watching us and why? What are we wearing? How do I get home at night? These are civic issues. These are issues of what a great city should be, and they pertain most they impinge most clearly on what is possible for women. So yeah, I think that's you know, we also think like, oh, you know, a city is made by its people. It's like, people are also made by the city in which women are, you know. And I mean, this is very, very clear to me as a you know, as a college girl and all, the difference between the way I inhabited Bombay and my contemporary women inhabited Delhi or Chennai, you know. It's not better or worse on it, it's just different. And of course, Bombay was best, but
yeah. No, but that's, and also you do in the same essay, you talk about the forest as the liminal space, where multiple dharmas can participate. And Shurpanakha, of course, in that just, you know, wanders freely and says that I'm a free woman. And of course, she's a Rakshasa, but, you know, it's...
well, you know, the forest as well, I mean, it's sort of all over literary theory and the way we understand text is the forest is the liminal space. You know, it is neither this nor, and it is by definition, it is the not city. And so you can be many different things in the forest. That's why Rama, his conflict about who he is, am I a Kshatriya? Do I want to be like a thinking person? Do I want to give up non-violence? All that happens in the forest, right? Shurpanakha, of course, embodies the forest most profoundly because she says, no man has any control over me. And again, Rama and Lakshmana make the profound mistake of bringing Ayodhya's dharma with them and, you know, sort of oppressing Shurpanakha by it. Say, according to the way we live, you are wrong. And of course, the consequences of her mutilation are catastrophic. I mean, it, in many ways, it's the central incident of the story, even before the abduction. No, if this had not happened, the story could not have rolled out in the way that it does. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember also during that time and all these like 10 years that I've hounded you with Ramayana questions.
You are my most beloved Ramayana student.
Yeah, no, is that you pointed out to me. Remember that moment when they enter the forest and it's Sita who reminds him to act in the way of the forest because he will continue to attract violence if he brings his kind of Kshatriya dharma with him into, or the weapons of a Kshatriya into the forest.
You know, Imran, that's doubly important because so the incident that Imran is talking about is just before the assault on Shurpanakha. Sita says to Rama, you know everything. I don't mean to tell you, but please listen to this. And she says, you should be really careful. When a Kshatriya is near his weapons, he's drawn to violence. And she said, we must not attack people with whom we have no enmity. We must be, and basically she says, don't live like a Kshatriya in the forest. Your Kshatriya dharma is for the city. We need to live different. When we go back to Ayodhya, you can become a Kshatriya again. And it is a profound, I mean, it's a deeply moving plea, not simply for nonviolence, but also for sensitivity to where you are. And it's the only time in the entire text when Sita speaks to him, not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a sister-in-law, not as a daughter. She speaks to him as a woman. She is complete, and that is only in the forest. You know, that she can be that. She can be entirely free of the social relations which bind us all in a Hindu universe. No, in a Hindu universe, we are never Arshia or Imran. We are the son, the mother, the daughter, the sister, the friend, the teacher, I mean, we exist in a constellation of dharmic possibilities, really, that have to be in conflict with each other. How can you be so many, how can you embody so many dharmas at one time? So
I mean, see what happened to Rama.
I know. So sad. It's impossible. It is impossible to be good all the time. It is impossible to do the right thing to everybody. And this is where I think that in this Hindu universe of ethics, we are profoundly different from the West, because here we are a relational self. So there are multiple ways that we have to be good simultaneously, and it's impossible. But it certainly makes us aware of the many the many responsibilities that we carry. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually I'm so happy that we finally started talking about Sita, because, you know, when I was writing out these questions, I was like, all my questions are about Rama, and the only time I mention Sita is in relation to Rama. And,
That's
you
a
know,
problem. But it's not your,
it's a
no,
big
it's not your problem. It's not your
No, it's
problem
not.
at all. It's, you know, it is, yeah, well, you know, like I said earlier, it's not called Sitayana. We can
Yeah.
turn ourselves blue in the face writing new versions of the Ramayana, which we can call Sitayana. And those are legitimate, powerful texts.
Yeah.
But that text, you know, we are encouraged to see her in relation first to Rama and then to Ravana, because she is captive, you know. So.
Yeah. But also that she has so much of agency in the Valmiki Ramayana, that because of patriarchy, we always think of her as, oh, you're so this ideal woman. But there are instances, and I remember you pointed out to me when I said that very stupid thing during the sessions. I was like,
when I made my angry eyes.
Angry eyes.
What did you say?
So I said, oh, Sita's such a boring character. She's nothing like Draupadi. Draupadi is so powerful. At which point, of course, Arshia made angry eyes at me, which she never does to students, ever, ever. But I got special angry eyes. And then she pointed out, not only that moment when Sita
Arshia, can you show us like what your angry eyes look like?
I'm in such a sweet mood today because of Imran that I can't do the angry eye. I'm sure somebody will ask a question which will make me do angry.
We can save it for the yeah. And you pointed out not only that moment in the forest, but also the two Agni Parikshas.
Yeah.
So I was, yeah.
No, see, the thing in what we, it's not that we forget, we are tutored to unremember the fact that at the end of the story, you know, after the Agni Pariksha, they come home triumphant, Rama reclaims the throne of Ayodhya, and of course he banishes Sita. And then at his great sacrifice, he listens to the story of his own life from his sons, who look exactly like him. He neither recognizes them nor recognizes the story of his own life until the moment where he is told, and Rama banished Sita into the forest. And then he stops his sons and he says, whose story is this? And they say, Papa, it's yours. And then he says, okay, are you the sons of Sita? Ask her to come to the sacrifice. So she does. And Valmiki brings her there. And before she can say or do anything, Valmiki says, this is Sita, she has always been pure. Rama, these are your sons. I am the 10th son of Prachetas and I do not lie. So he legitimates the sons in the public sphere of Ayodhya. And Rama says, you know, I always believed that my wife was chaste, but other people wouldn't, right? So, Sita, can you just take one more pariksha, just for the citizens of Ayodhya? You know, because what you did in front of those Rakshasas and Bandars and all that, that doesn't quite count, right? And Sita, at that moment, she doesn't even look at him. She doesn't say a word. In her mind, she says to her mother, who we assume is the earth, take me away. Right? In the Agni Pariksha in Ayodhya, in Lanka, also very important to remember, which we often don't. In Lanka, at the end of the war, Sita says, Lakshmana, build me a pyre, right? Yeah. It's not Rama who says, go walk into the fire because, you know, you're such a bad woman. On the contrary, she's like, I want to do this, right? Mm. Before she steps into the fire, she says, if I have been pure, let me come back, right? But in Ayodhya, when she does the second pariksha, she says, if I am pure, take me away. And that is agency, right? Yeah. So she chooses to leave her husband. She chooses to leave a marriage, which for her now has become untenable. The sons have been returned to Rama. The lineage, the great, you know, Kakutstavansha is safe. There is no question that these are Rama's sons. She's done. And you know, Rama, as we know, is distraught at the, you know, once she leaves, but it's too late. She's gone.
Yeah. And also in your translation of the Valmiki Ramayana, there's that super painful moment when she arrives and she's looking at him with all this love, and he says those horrible things to her, like
Says, you are like
a flame.
yeah, you are like a lamp
Like
to
a
a man.
lamp to a man with diseased eyes.
My
Like,
God.
yeah.
Ooh, it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
What he says to, but also at that moment, she talks back and she says, how can you talk to me like this?
Yeah.
You're talking like, she says, unfortunately, she says, like a low and vulgar being.
Yeah.
Not the, no, I mean, you know, not a statement I would like to repeat because it insinuates caste, but what she is really saying is that these words are not worthy of the great Rama. And she says, you married me as a young girl, and after all these years, you don't even know who I am. You have never seen me for who I am. Yeah, you've got some other picture in your head. And she said, you know what? Just build me this pyre. And that is also quite amazing, you know, because this is the thing. No, this is what I tell everybody. Read the text. Read the story. Don't let somebody else tell you. And we're now old enough to read our own stories. You know, oh, I'm 10 years old, you know, Dadi told me, Nani told me, Mummy told me. No, we have no excuse anymore. I'm certain that everybody who's listening tonight is old enough to read Ramayana, and in my translation, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course.
And you know, the thing is, you should be so thankful that there's so many people in the world, including myself, who have made it possible for you not to learn Sanskrit. We have suffered for you so that you can read Ramayana in translation and enjoy it. And it's only when we read the text that we see, you know that for yourself, no, Imran? That when you read the text, it opens up its treasures. It's like, it's like a lotus that's blooming slowly, you know, and then before you notice, you're inside the lotus, you know, and you will never see the lotus the same way again, because I'm sorry, lotus is a BJP symbol, but you know, it's a very common Sanskrit metaphor, and it's a very beautiful one, and it's a very useful. So.
But also like the moon, no? Like today I got some calls which were like, why have you called it Reading Ramayana by Moonlight? And I was like, that's a little thing between Arshia and me, because every time you and I have a conversation, somehow we'll talk about the moon.
Not to mention that if there is a beautiful moon, we promptly start texting each other.
Exactly.
Wherever we are in the world.
Exactly. It's like a swan gliding upon a darkened lake. This is why, you are absolutely right. This is why people must read the Ramayana, and this is why people must read your translation, because you're able to draw out these metaphors. Like I remember the time you explained Gajgamini to me. And like I never saw an elephant the same ever again.
Yeah, you shouldn't see. I mean, you know, so in Valmiki Ramayana, Sita, like a lot of other beautiful women in Sanskrit texts before and after Valmiki, they are very often described as Gajagamini, right? And when you say the word Gajagamini, you can see the elephant walking, right? It has, of course, this beautiful gaga alliteration, but look at Gajagamini, you know, and that is really how the elephant, and in India, we have this enormous privilege of actually seeing elephants walk, On Jangli Maharaj Road in Pune, when I used to go to work, Imran, there was an elephant every three times a week. There would be this elephant. I was like, Gajagamini. But you know, I mean, as a translator, it leaves you with a real problem. I mean, you know, in English, she walks like a female elephant, doesn't carry anything, you know, and it's not like, oh, she's writing for the Western reader. I'm not writing for the Western reader. I'm writing for Indians who don't speak other Indian languages, right? And who certainly don't access Sanskrit. So what do you do with a phrase like that? No, and that I think is really, it's an example of the kind of conundrum that is translation, because I think it's very important when you read a translated text to remember that you are reading a translated text, right? That I don't want Ramayana to read as if it's a story that happened down the street. You know, some guy ran off with somebody else's wife and then he went and fought with him and he got him back. No, it has to be about kings who live 60,000 years. It has to be about monkeys that fly and speak Sanskrit. It has to be about 10-headed demons, right? So you must maintain the otherness of the text, as it were, but you must allow the reader to believe that that otherness belongs to them as well. You know, I mean, and I think Ramayana succeeds in doing that admirably. Like, who says when Hanuman arrives, "Hare, that monkey is speaking Sanskrit"? Huh? Nobody says that. In fact, the only person who does is
Yeah, is he that? Yeah. Oh my God, it's a monkey speaking Sanskrit.
What is this? I'm dreaming. How can a monkey speak Sanskrit?
Yeah.
You know? So she calls the bluff because she's so excited. But the rest of us, we're so caught up in the magic of the story that, you know, that we just say, oh, monkeys flying, monkeys speaking Sanskrit. Yeah, possible. You know, and I think that's really what a text needs to, and what a translator needs to do, is to not prevent the magic from spilling over, but to maintain the magic, you need to keep the distance. You know, it's like a magician. I mean, he's not going to show you how he does the trick. That sleight of hand, even if you know it's sleight of hand, it's got to be invisible, right? So like that, the translator has to make the magic visible without showing you how it's done.
Do you do, like, when you're translating, do you do multiple words and then try and figure out how the best one will sort of work?
Yes, some phrases are very difficult. Gajagamani was one of them. So I think I ended up doing "She walks with a swaying grace." I lose the elephant, but the elephant at that point is not as important as how beautiful it is to watch her walk.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And so I'm going to ask a question, which I've always wanted to ask you, is that if you hadn't done it in the 90s and you were asked to do it now, would you do it? And would you think of it differently because of, like, the craziness that we live with now?
Well, you know, somebody asked me now, I'd say I wouldn't do it. I was so young when I did this. I was 34, 35, and I was like, "Hey, Ramayana, of course, give me." Now I realize, but I would translate it differently, not because of our current environment, but because I'm a different person.
Exactly.
I would 100% have included a full-blooded Uttarakanda even in the abridged version. You know, when I did it, 25 years ago, I thought, nothing happens in Uttarakanda. You were just sitting there listening to stories. And all these stories we've already heard. And then, you know, I mean, as I spend more and more time with the text, I was like, my God, Uttarakanda is critical. Because of what happens to him. It's not like he doesn't do anything. He is the thing that we're looking at in Uttarakanda. So that, I think that's the biggest difference that I would have made. I mean, you know, of course, and you know this yourself as a translator, I mean, sometimes you read something you've translated and you're like, oh God, I could have done that so much better. But equally, there are moments when you read your own translation, you're like, oh, I don't know how I pulled that off. So, you know, isn't that true? I mean, you feel great pride and moments, of course, where you feel terrible, like, you know, not shame. I mean, shame is a big fat word. You feel discomfort, like, oh, I should have worked on that more. So I don't think it would have been substantially different, except for the inclusion of Uttarakanda. And you can argue that that's the most substantial of all reasons. You know, maybe I would have done more with Balakanda as well. You know, when I was younger, I was much closer to my graduate school persona, you know, then than I am now. And I was obsessed with this, like, oh, this is before, this is after, this is later, this is, you know, this stuff. And now I'm saying, like, this is the text. You know, when we think Valmiki Ramayana, it includes Bala and Uttarakandas. There are many, many things that we can talk about in that regard, but we cannot say that this, that, you know, Ramayana is only the middle books. So.
But also that the fact that the Balakanda and Uttarakanda, and this is something I got obsessed with during those 10 days that I did with you, and then for 10 years after that. And I remember so clearly this moment of us driving together, driving home in Pune, where I asked you, and you know, I had come from like this University of Bombay MA, thinking about time and like memory and all these like things. And I said, but when is it happening? Is it now? Is it over? Is it in the present? Is it in the past? And that's what's beautiful when you read it, is that not only is there kind of like an orality that's built into the text, because Rama is always like, oh, who am I? And everyone has to tell him. But the fact that the story comes from Narada and then to the boys, and then they're reading it. And then, of course, like you mentioned earlier, that great scene at the end where he's like, this, what a great story. Who is these?
Yeah. Now, the other thing, of course, is that as with Mahabharata, that we are listening to the story at the same time that Rama is listening to the story. We are with that internal audience. The story is being told in this huge, Yajnashala. He's performing the Ashwamedha. It's the biggest sacrifice you can perform, apart from Rajasuya. Yeah. So as everybody is listening, as Rama is listening, we are listening too.
Yeah.
And so when Rama says, "Who is this story about?" we're like, oh, did I get it wrong? Is it not Rama's story? So it's a moment of extreme intimacy.
Yeah.
And it's also, of course, it's the moment where this extremely sophisticated frame narrative breaks down. And that, then we have to ask, where is Valmiki in the story? Is he inside it or outside it? And we have the same set of questions with Vyasa. So of course, with Vyasa, it's, this is the thing about Mahabharata. It's so unsubtle. All the questions that one can ask in and of Ramayana, questions that don't have easy answers, the Mahabharata gives you those answers. It says, well, the visible narrator, he's inside the story and outside the story at the same time. He's telling his own story as much as he's telling the story of the king, Janameja or Janameja's ancestors,
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I'll always remember about Sanjay is when he said, the one thing you should always remember to ask the question, who is speaking? When you are reading a book.
Yes.
Yeah. And like that is just ingrained in my memory whenever
Absolutely.
I'm reading anything.
We were reading the Bible together once.
Exactly.
My mother, yeah. And he's like, but who is speaking? And it's like, I think it's God. And he's like, no, it's not. Yeah. It was the biggest question, and we stopped reading because we couldn't answer that question.
Couldn't answer the question. But because it's so complicated, you wrote, of course, you've written Hanuman for children, you've written Ramayana for children, but you just say it as it is. Because once you said this lovely thing is that I don't write for the child and the adult, but I write for the adult and the child.
Yes.
And I was wondering, like, when you're retelling a story which is as complicated, as problematic as this, how do you grapple with it? How do you think about it? What do you think you can say? What you shouldn't say? What you should say?
Well, as a translator and as a reteller for children, both times, you just have to tell the truth. You have to say what the text is saying, as a translator. You want to read out the story, go read out the story. I mean, that's a whole nother enterprise. And as you can imagine, it becomes a little bit different when the text that you love is saying things that you don't love. When the text is saying things that are difficult for you to live with and to grapple with. But as I do with my translation, text says, and I trust my reader to figure it out. And I think we don't trust children enough. I think an 8, 9, 10-year-old has a very intuitive sense by then of what is right and what is wrong. They don't need us to tell them, this is the bad guy. No. They know what is going on. And if they don't, they will ask the question, And so when I did Ramayana for children, in all these interviews, people are asking me, what is your message?
Yeah.
Like, what is my message? Why do we think that only adults read for pleasure? Why do you have to give children a message? No, this is Ramayana. I was like, listen, man, if you want to give Ramayana message to your child, you do it. It's not my responsibility. I'm not doing this for you. Anyway, the message that I give, you don't want your child to have. Right? Let's just put this message question aside, and I think it, and that's the thing also, Imran, I'm most comfortable translating for the 10 to 14-year-old because I understand, I believe that I understand the vocabulary that I can use for them, not simply the literal vocabulary, but an emotional vocabulary, and I think an existential vocabulary. I mean, of course, I'm not going to say existential in whatever it is that I write for them, but you know, they know about how to be good and what is bad, and you know, those are those are
and they get it. We forget that they get it, you know.
I mean, I know that you've been reading Ramayana to your nephews and nieces, and you're very sweet. You always send me the pictures of you reading together. But I mean, I can see their faces. They ain't looking at you. I mean, they're looking at the book. You know? So they know that the answer is not with Imran. The answer is in the book itself. I think that's a very crucial distinction. You know, when one is reading to a child, where is the child looking? You know, give the child agency.
Because I remember, actually, I know the photograph you're referring to when I read Pampa Sutra.
Right, it was Pampa.
And what a great book. They really need to bring Pampa. Oh, such a beautiful book. And I remember them being so, not only just like taken by the beauty of the book, but also I remember the last bit, which is about the river, like the polluting of the river. And they just got it so quickly without me having to explain to them.
But we must, in that context, mention Shiloh, Shiv Suleiman, who did
of course, those illustrations.
Yeah, those are just amazing.
We're getting, so it looks like we're getting a ton of questions. But now I'm talking to you, Arshia. So I have one last question, and then I will everyone else can
use your power, baby. Use your power.
Okay, so you wrote this article on Dharma, because I want to talk about your new book, because otherwise you and I will just talk about Ramayana and Valmiki and we'll I really want to talk about your new book. So in that you say the exquisite tension between karma and dharma lies at the very heart of Hinduism. It is the tension between our actions, what we believe is the basis for those actions, the tension between what we do and why we do it. So I was wondering if Maryada, which is coming out on the 25th of October, did it emerge from that article, and did it develop out of?
I don't know which came out of which. Possibly the article. You know, that's the thing also.
Arshia, if you don't mind, this is Vikram. Could you just explain for the audience what Maryada is? Because I think Imran, you know, but most people here.
Sorry, sometimes we do that.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you, Vikram. You say.
No, you say.
Oh, I say. Okay. So I have a new book of essays on the Ramayana, and the book is called Maryada, The Search for Dharma in the Ramayana. And what I do, it's my preferred way of thinking about Ramayana. I do like a series of essays that are interconnected either by character or by idea, or obviously by the text itself. And so, you know, Maryada, of course, comes from Maryada Purushottama, the perfect man. But Maryada also means a boundary. And so it sets up the space that we must not transgress, the boundary that we must not cross. And you know, again, Rama dominates our imagination of the Ramayana and in the Ramayana, but not everybody, there's so many characters there who are also facing dharmic conflicts. You know, one of the things, I talk about the queens, Dasharatha's queens, and I think one of the things that we might need to think about is like, we've been brought up to believe that Kaikeyi is the bad woman. Why is she the bad woman? She was doing what any mother would do. She was watching out for her son. Right? So if we think about that, then Kaikeyi is actually performing the dharma of a mother. It may not be the best dharma available to her because it hurts so many people, but it is a dharma, right? Lakshmana is one of my favorite characters in Ramayana. And so there's a whole chapter on Lakshmana and how his definition of dharma is different from Rama's. Rama believes that dharma is about righteousness. Lakshmana believes that dharma is about justice. Right? And I think those two don't go together. So Lakshmana wants to, you know, put Dasharatha away because he says he's doing the wrong thing. It is unjust that you do not be king. And Rama's like, well, he's my father, he's the king, he has the right to change his decision. So that's a very interesting conflict between the two brothers. And I mean, you know, I think it's up to all of us to decide which definition of Dharma is more appealing to us. Then there's this whole business about the Dharma of a king, which we started the session by talking about. Is it okay for a king to say, I don't want to be a Kshatriya? Is it okay for a king to be reluctant? If you have spent your entire life being brought up to be king, can you actually say when you get the crown, you know what, I don't really want this, right? It's like, no, well, you know, one kind of Dharma, one of the Dharmas that is within your realm of choice is you cannot say that. And another Dharma, which is again within your realm of choice, which says, no, you know what, I don't want to be king because I don't want to kill people, or I don't want to banish my wife, or I want to live in the forest. So there are multiple characters in the Ramayana struggle with what is the right thing to do. And of course, Rama's struggle is foregrounded. And the beauty of Rama is really that he always wants to do the right thing. But the tragedy is when he does the right thing and it goes wrong. Yeah, even he has no control over that. And you know, that I think that's why he's called Maryada Purushottama, because he does the right thing no matter how hard it is. And it is very hard. It is, we may disagree with his choices, but certainly he didn't make those choices without thinking. He might actually have made them because he thought about them too much. But, you know, I'll stop because otherwise I'll get myself into a hole.
Arshia, we'll go back a little bit to some of the questions that came up in the Zoom chat. One question that came up quite a while back was whether you had only looked at the Valmiki Ramayana. Let me just expand that question. That yes, you know, your work has been with the Valmiki Ramayana, but you must have some awareness of the many other Ramayanas. And so, can I ask, like, what does one get from reading all the other Ramayanas?
Well, one realizes what a rich tradition it is and how there isn't just one story, and there are multiple ways to tell Ramayana, and there are multiple tellers of Ramayana, right? And I think one of the things that's happening to Ramayana since the 1980s is we are being told there is only one story, there is only one way to think about this story, there is only one way to think about Rama, and that has never been the case. In the 2,500-year history of Ramayana, it has always had multiple tellings, right? And many of the tellings are subversive, challenging, questioning. The Ramayana is not afraid of questions. It's the people who control Ramayana who are afraid of questions, you know? Is that
No, absolutely. Now, Ashok Joshi just asked a question which even I wanted to ask. He said he wants to know about your work on the Kathasaritsagara. I'm also very curious about this. I mean, because I've always been fascinated by the Kathasaritsagara and all this long tradition of stories that flow out of India and become, you know, so many, the Arabian Nights and the things, and all these sort of sea of stories that come out of India. Is there any relationship between the Kathasaritsagara and the Ramayana?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Ramayana is one of the stories that flows into the mighty ocean of story. And there's a version of Uttarakanda in Kathasaritsagara where, you know, Sita has her children in Valmiki's ashram and, you know, what happens there. Actually, it's a very interesting version of Uttarakanda, because what happens is Sita has gone to bathe. Sita has only one son. And his name is Lava. And one day when she goes to bathe, she takes the baby with her, and Valmiki comes into her heart and says, oh my God, the baby's gone. And he thinks a wild animal has taken it. It doesn't occur to him that Sita might have taken the baby with him. And so he picks up a blade of kusha grass and creates an identical baby. And that baby is called Kusha. And that's how there are twins, right? Now that's really interesting. And that, as you mentioned, as I overheard you say earlier, when we were talking before the session started, this difference between high and low culture, the so-called folk and the so-called classical. Now this Kusha story, the Kathasaritsagara one, is completely a folk tale, right? And it destroys the hegemonic power of the Indo-European narrative where there must be twins, right? It destroys the head. It doesn't destroy, but it certainly talks back to So yes, of course, Ramayana and Kathasaritsagara are related. But Kathasaritsagara, of course, has a much longer history that is lost to us. We only have now the 11th century text that was put together in Kashmir, and it was written in Sanskrit. Oh goodness, what was I going to say? How are the texts really? Yes. So the Kathasaritsagara, the origins of the saga itself are not as classical, perhaps, as we would like to imagine. Certainly they're Sanskrit stories, but they seem to have been written by and for merchant classes. They were not written for Brahmins and Kshatriyas. In the classical tradition, if we open up the classical tradition as widely as we can, it's the one truly secular text that we have. Not the one, it's one of the few truly. So all kinds of people are in Kathasaritsagara. Buddhists, Jains, merchants, like monks, smart women, silly women, courtesans. Courtesans are a huge part of the Sagara tradition. And they're all urban stories. They're either seafaring or they're urban. So in those ways, it talks about a world that could not be more different from the world of the Ramayana. Oh, I want to say that, that given that this is 11th century Kashmir, a place that is, has so much going on in it, so many religious traditions, so much, it's like a caravanserai almost, despite its mountains. So the one thing that is missing in Kathasaritsagara, noticeable by that absence, there are no Muslims. So, but that is also because it is a court text, it is composed in a particular environment and all that. So, and I mean, I do think the Sagara is a very important text, again, because it is contrapuntal. It is telling us a set of stories, it is singing a song that are more canonized texts are not singing. And that's a very important song. It's a song that we must listen to. We may find it cacophonic. We might say, I don't like all this, lok sangeet, and I only want like classical or Carnatic. Whatever it is, you still have to hear it, So.
Imran, do you have anything to add from your
work? No. It's one of those moments, Arshia, I had a question and then suddenly it like disappeared. You have that moment.
It happens. We're all aging.
Yeah. No, actually, when we would, I wanted to also say, because a lot of people never know this, is that even like Akbar's Ramayana, for example, as a Muslim telling the story or doing that, and I was doing some research a couple of months ago, and I found a Masnavi that was written in the early part of the late 19th century, which talks about which is the Ramayana, but in which Rama is going for Hajj and Rama is doing all kinds of things, and this is what is so beautiful, and we forget, no?
I mean, the Laotian and Southeast Asian, Rama and Lakshmana are bodhisattvas, and one of the reasons, I mean, Lakshmana performs all the many violences. Rama cannot, because he's on his way to becoming the Buddha. He cannot do violent things and be set back several lifetimes. Yes, absolutely. This is the genius of the Ramayana, that it is so welcoming. It is so absorptive. You want to tell your story this way? Use my characters. My characters will tell your story as well as they tell mine. And, that's what we're losing when we're being forced to read, only one kind of text and talk about it only in one particular way. And that's not true just of Ramayana. That's true for everything that's happening in this country at the moment.
But like, I think that the Lakshman Rekha is like a perfect example of this, is that how it's gotten absorbed into this, but it's not in the Valmiki Ramayana at all.
Yeah, it's probably, I've been trying to find it. My mother-in-law, who is, sort of Kamban reading, Tamil Brahmin lady, she says it's not in Kamba.
It's not.
Yeah, and some people tell me it's not in Tulsi either. So imagine how late it is, but how quick we've been to make
True.
it, you know,
Yeah.
something by which women must live, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, maybe somebody should do like a study. How many times, even in the English language press, how
Yes.
many times is Lakshman Rekha mentioned a
Yes.
year? It will be more than 52. I have
So
no doubt about that.
Yeah, so I did this thing where I would, every time there was a news report, I'd quickly read it. Or if there was what was happening in Rajya Sabha, for example, you'd end up reading it. And the amount of times Lakshman Rekha has been used in courts of law, especially with divorce and
Yeah.
separation and things like that, it's bizarre.
It is
But
very-
again, that is so beautiful, is that it's so much a part of our language.
Oh, yeah. It's a cultural vocabulary.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do you hear? I mean, I hear it all. Arey, puri Ramayana sun ke puchta hai Sita kaun hai?
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be me being very banal, but the one thing that always gets me about Lakshman Rekha is that it's used in daily household conversation for that cockroach,
Yeah,
excluding.
well done. For reminding us of that. Yeah, the cockroach. Yeah.
But
imagine from the sublime to the ridiculous.
Yes.
From keeping Sita safe, right, to not letting the cockroach enter the kitchen. Who's the cockroach? Really. I mean, what do we say?
Arshia, you said right at the beginning of the talk that you've been increasingly interested in the figure of Lakshman and in exploring his role. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, like Sita, as Imran said when we started, that Sita is only seen in relation to Rama. So too, Lakshmana is seen only in relationship to his older brother and in terms of what his brother did do and what he didn't do. And Lakshmana is, I think even our interest in Lakshmana outside of the Sanskrit Ramayana tradition, that even our interest in Lakshmana gets moved to Urmila, his wife, right? What was she doing? Why didn't he take her? How did she feel? How did she feel when he came back? And there's this beautiful, beautiful story where she says to Lakshmana, and she is of course Sita's sister, and she says to Lakshmana when he's leaving, she says, I will sleep for these 14 years. I will sleep for you so that when you are in the forest, you will be ever vigilant and you will be able to take care of Rama and Sita, right? And when he comes back, she wakes up and she says, who are you, right? It's sort of a mixture of Rip Van Winkle and Sleeping Beauty and all that. And the other story of Urmila is that she spent her time becoming a Vidushi. She became a scholar. And when Rama comes back, she challenges him. She challenges the decisions that he makes. But where are the other stories about Lakshmana? Yeah. So, and I've always found him like, strong, silent type. Well, he's not so silent. He talks a lot more than Rama does. In fact, he's not silent. He expresses the things that Rama cannot express. He expresses the anger. He expresses the frustration. He expresses the critiques of his father's behavior. He shouts at Sugriva. He says, what kind of guy are you, man? What do you know about an alliance? He also shouts at Rama. So the only person with whom Rama has an ongoing intellectual and philosophical engagement is actually with Lakshmana. And but really the thing that made me think like I really have to take this guy more seriously is, at the end of the Ramayana in Uttarakanda, Kala arrives, sent by Brahma to tell Rama, your time is up. It's time for you to come back now and go back to your Vishnuness. But Kala arrives and says, I have to talk to Rama. It's a private conversation. And so Lakshmana takes him to Rama, and Rama says, Lakshmana, guard the door. Don't let anybody in. Because Kala says, whoever interrupts our conversation, that person will die. Durvasa, of course, comes along. Who else is going to come? Oh, is Rama, tamasha. And Lakshmana says, no, you can't. And he says, who are you? Right? And of course, he bursts in and, the curse goes into motion. And Lakshmana says to Rama, I have to die because this is what has, and Rama's like, no, please don't do. But Lakshmana, he goes alone to the banks Rama leaves to go back to his Vishnu, whole city follows him, the Rakshasas come, the Vanaras come, all the gods come down. Nobody came for Lakshmana. And he's also a part of Vishnu, right? He's an Amsha, he's not an Avatara, but he's just lying there. And I thought like, wow, this to me, it's a self-willed death, right? And I think it's a suicide, actually. Because not simply that his time on earth is over because Rama is not going to be there, but he has done everything that Rama asked him against his own better judgment. He has been critical of Rama. He says, don't do this, think about this, think about that. But he never doesn't do it. And there's a point at which he's like, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot build a pyre for Sita. I cannot be the one who has to leave her in the forest under false pretenses. I cannot watch her come back and, disappear forever. So the burden that Lakshmana carries is really the burden of Rama's perfection, right? And it becomes too heavy for him. And he dies in just, isn't that the death we wish for the people that we love? And the death that we wish for ourselves as well, that I will just go and I will lie down in a beautiful place and my breath will stop.
Vikram, you're muted. Vikram is trying to say something.
No, I was just asking if the audience has any more questions. I mean, people have just been listening, and it's been an amazing audience. Somebody's just asked a question about the Baroda critical edition.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit about this?
Well, all our ancient texts, including Veda, were oral. Yeah, Veda perhaps more spectacularly than anything else, but eventually they got written down, right? And what happens is that no manuscript is identical. Sometimes because people have bad handwriting, sometimes because they hear it incorrectly. But manuscripts can vary more greatly than that. And so what we do with things like Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Mahabharata has its own magnificent critical edition, which was produced by the Bhandarkar Oriental Institute in Pune. So what happens is we divide, we call them manuscript traditions, and we do it very simply, north, south, east, west, right? And so we compare manuscripts. This is also interesting, huh? The earliest manuscript we have of the Ramayana is from the 15th century. And guess what? It wasn't found in India, it was found in Nepal. Of course, we'll say that's because the Muslims came and burnt the manuscripts. That's not true. And Nepal is a Hindu kingdom and they kept, none of that is true. It just happens to be that the manuscript was found in Nepal. And then we compare manuscripts within traditions, and a critical edition is formed from verses that occur in every single manuscript tradition, right? So if we are looking at 6 manuscripts, and 6 manuscripts say Lakshmana cut off Shurpanakha's ears and nose, then that will be in the main text of the critical edition. But so that's 6 manuscripts. And if 4 out of the 6 say Lakshmana cut off Shurpanakha's ears, nose, and breasts, then that will come outside. It'll be in the book, but it won't be in the main text. And if we have 2 manuscripts that say Lakshmana cut off her ears, nose, breasts, and tongue, then that will be the second one. So as a scholar, you have available to you all the many ways in which the Ramayana was recorded. But the most common one will be first, then the next, then the next, then the next. And that's how we know that there is no Lakshman Rekha. What we also, and this is again something that we choose not to focus on, in Mahabharata, in the critical edition of the Mahabharata, Krishna does not come when Draupadi prays. And her clothes are not extended. And that to me is remarkable. That is truly remarkable. But it also shows us that we're dealing with layers of a story that were pre-Bhakti Hinduism, that were before the idea of Avatara, before the idea of Vishnu being Krishna and Rama. Yeah, so that to me as a scholar is interesting. And I think it should not be erased. But given everything else that's being erased now, I mean, what is this? It's nothing. It's just... Yeah.
Imran, if I could ask you a question, since you've worked so much on performances of the Mahabharata, of the Ramayana, I mean, one of the interesting differences between the two texts is that the Ramayana has been a much more performed text, right? I mean, there's this long history of performances of the Mahabharata, of the Ramayana. How do you think performances have changed or influenced the Ramayana?
I think actually, because I'm thinking a little specifically about the work that I do in Kulu, and I think that I've always found that it was the introduction of, okay, so I'll kind of situate this, is that the valley of Kulu in Himachal has 280 devtas and devis. Yeah, they are drawn from the natural elements, they're drawn from ancestors, they are manifestations of snakes, and they have their independent kind of performance or worship or whatever it is. Yeah, in the 17th century, when the statue of Rama was brought from Ayodhya by the king and introduced into the Kulu Valley, the nature of those performances began to change. And it became a way in which not only was Vaishnavism being spread in the mountains, but also a way in which the king was controlling these tiny, smaller kingdoms. Yeah. So every year they would have to come back during Dasera. And not only would they have to pay homage, but they also have to pay nazar. Yeah. They have to pay a tax. Yeah. And I think, I think that's what also, and I think that has a huge impact on the way we think about it, because even during the time of that, and this is something that I think Arshia and I have also may have spoken about, I think at some point, is that, the king as not only as kingship, but also as sage or ascetic. Yeah. And for a long time during that 10 days of Dasera that they have in Kulu, is that the king wears not only the clothes of the Raja for most of it, but on 2 particular days, he will wear the robes of a priest. And he will worship the statue in a particular kind of way. And it, of course, changes everything. Is that now a lot of the devtas and the devis of the area are sort of, I'm going to use the word aligning to mainstream Hinduism, where they are saying that they are descendants of Rama or Krishna or the Mahabharata, characters from the Mahabharata. But it wasn't true before the 17th century, if that kind of answers it.
Arshia, do you have anything to say about how the fact that the Ramayana is also a performative text changes the way it's been understood?
Yeah, that's also true of Mahabharata. In fact, Mahabharata is more commonly performed because the conflicts are externalized, and in Ramayana the conflicts are so profoundly internal. There's nothing really to show, except until Hanuman comes along, and then there's a lot of fun. But I mean, I know that most of us, including myself, most of us enter Ramayana because we have seen Ram Leela and we have seen Hanuman, and that's a really interesting entry point, that we are not interested in Rama the hero or the god or whatever. Is this guy, is this flying monkey that speaks Sanskrit and can burn a city and is really funny and is really wise and who does not bring back the princess even though he could. That is our entry point, right? And so I think I don't, and the Hanuman stories outside the Ramayana are prolific. He is the most outside the epics character that is written about. So to that extent, yeah, I do think Ramayana performance, I think it certainly changes our reception of the text. And really that's what it's all about, no? Because the text is what it is, but it's what we make of it that becomes critical in whether this is a text of inclusion or exclusion, if it's a text of patriarchy or hegemony or caste. That is our reading. The text itself is probably, open enough to let those questions be asked, right? And it's we who make it patriarchal and, all the other things that we struggle with. Yeah.
But I think exactly is that, like, within the performances, this is what I'll always love about it, is that all the performances or all the stories that come and build this huge ocean of Ramayana stories are dealing with all the things that the Valmiki Ramayana just does not want to think about. It's saying what is not said.
But everything is there. It chooses not to make
Exactly.
a big deal about it.
Yeah. Like I think like in Sita Sings the Blues, no? I think that says it beautifully, is the shadow puppets where they're like, is her name Janaki? No, her name is Sita. And then they'll go into this, they have no idea what is going on, no? But, and it's true of like reading the Ramayana, you never know what's going on. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're at 9 o'clock, which we really should be tailing off. You know, if anybody has any last questions to ask, I'll give you a chance when I ask one last sort of question to both Imran and Arshia. You know, the incidents in the Ramayana are so vivid that other times that in other stories, other tales, you've seen something and said, you know, oh my God, that's from the Ramayana, or it could be from the Ramayana. I mean, I'll give you a very silly example. It's like when I was watching the Game of Thrones, and I'm sorry, guys, see, Arshia is already laughing. And
You're right. You're right. Yeah.
There's one climatic scene is where Daenerys Targaryen like burns down the tent and kills all the Khalees. And I was like, oh my God, that's the Agni Pariksha right there.
No, absolutely. The other day I watched Awara, the Raj Kapoor picture, you know, for the first time really as an adult. It's the whole of the first half is Ramayana, completely.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And he even he throws out his wife because he thinks she had an affair. Where did that come from? There's only one story I know that makes us feel about it. You know, Ramayana is everywhere. I mean, once we read it, yeah. And for good reason. I mean, it is a story about primary human emotions, about love and loss and jealousy and betrayal. You know, this is every human being can relate to something in Ramayana, which may not be possible in Mahabharata, you know, but Ramayana, somebody is going to speak to you. Somebody in that story is going to say, you feel this too.
Okay, I'm amazed. I mean, we only seem to have compliments. I mean, there's no controversy. There are no trolls. I'm almost disappointed. I mean, what is this? I mean, we were like waiting for the trolls and the trolls haven't appeared. I mean, it's like...
You know, Sanjay used to say this to me. He says, what kind of books do you write? Everybody likes them right-wing, left-wing, feminist, anti-feminist. What are you doing? And I was like, it's just a good book, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, I suppose, I mean, while it's disappointing from a dramatic point of view, I think it's wonderful that, you know, that at a time when we're living in, it's still possible to have a civil, happy, enlivening discussion. Somebody wants to see you do the angry eyes. You
I was just going to say,
well, you know, maybe this is not the moment for angry eyes. Maybe this is the moment to remember.
So,
this is the moment when we're lost in the lotus. Right. Lost in the lotus.
Lotus. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Arshia and Imran. I mean, it's been a really amazing session. It's been our best attended session, I think, ever. I mean, we've had more than 100 people attending it, which is quite incredible. And more than that, at least 80 people at least have stayed on right through to the end, which is really quite remarkable and a testimony to both of you. Thank you very much for being part of here. I just want to quickly mention our event affiliates. EcoPostro, which is an organic and reusable products store in Goa, and Edible Archives, which is an amazing restaurant that focuses on a lot of traditional foods. Arshia, you have to come to Goa because they're going to give you lots of free things. So if you come to Goa, you can use the stuff that the EcoPostro and Edible Archives is giving us, whereas Imran just has to like come over from Nachnola to the other side of the highway and use them. A lot of people are saying we wish this could have gone on a bit longer. Yeah, we do too. But I mean, the answer is you have to go to Arshia's books, and Maryada is going to be launched. What is the launch date for Maryada, Arshia?
It's the end of October. Yeah.
8th of October. So yes. For those who can't like participate in the session, the books are there. Thank you very much for helping us with this session, and we'll hope to see you again at the next Das Critique Talk next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, my dear Imran.
Thank you, Arshia.